They say your life can change in an instant. For me, that instant came on a frosty December morning in Denver, Colorado. I was 36, juggling a demanding career, friendships, and a packed calendar that barely left room to breathe. Life was a whirlwind, and I prided myself on being able to handle it all, until the day I couldn't. I was driving to work, running late as usual, with a coffee in one hand and my phone lighting up in the cup holder. It had snowed the night before, and a thin layer of ice coated the roads. I knew I should have been paying more attention, but my mind was already racing ahead to the meeting I was supposed to lead in 30 minutes. Then it happened. The car in front of me slammed on the brakes. I panicked, hitting my own brakes hard, but my tires lost traction. Time slowed as my car spun out of control, skidding across the icy road before smashing into the guardrail. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass was deafening, and the force of the impact threw me forward against my seatbelt. When the car came to a stop, there was silence. My ears were ringing, my hands were trembling, and for a moment, I thought I was okay. Then I tried to move. A searing pain shot through my lower back, radiating down my legs. I couldn't feel my feet. Panic set in as I realized something was terribly wrong. The paramedics arrived quickly, their voices calm and professional as they loaded me onto a stretcher, but their reassurances barely registered. All I could think about was the numbness in my legs and the overwhelming sense that my life was about to change forever. At the hospital, the doctors delivered the news. I had suffered a herniated disc and nerve damage in my spine, along with fractured ribs. Surgery was necessary, but even with the best care, they couldn't guarantee I'd fully recover. I would need months, possibly years, of physical therapy to regain mobility. "You're lucky," one of the doctors said. It could have been much worse. I didn't feel lucky. I felt shattered. The days after the surgery were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and helplessness. Simple tasks, rolling over in bed, sitting up, standing, became monumental challenges. The Sarah Roberts who used to hike in the Rockies on weekends, who danced at weddings and chased after her nieces and nephews, was gone. In her place was a woman who couldn't take 2 steps without collapsing in pain. Coming home was even harder. My once cozy apartment now felt like a prison. The stairs leading to my second-floor unit were impossible to climb, so I stayed on the ground floor, setting up a makeshift living space in the tiny living room. I relied on a walker to get around, and even that took every ounce of energy I had. Everything I had taken for granted, driving, cooking, showering, became insurmountable obstacles. My independence was gone, and with it, my sense of self. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the loneliness. At first, friends and family visited often, bringing flowers and casseroles and offering words of encouragement. "You're so strong," they'd say, but I didn't feel strong. I felt like a burden. As the weeks turned into months, the visits became less frequent. Everyone had their own lives to return to, and I didn't blame them. After all, I wasn't exactly good company. I avoided mirrors because I couldn't bear to see what I had become. My once athletic frame had grown soft and weak, and my face, always full of life, now looked pale and tired. I spent hours scrolling through social media, torturing myself with images of people running marathons, climbing mountains, and living the kind of life I could only dream about. Anger became my constant companion. I was angry at the ice, at the driver in front of me, at my own body for betraying me. I replayed the accident in my mind over and over, searching for what I could have done differently. But no amount of hindsight could change the reality of my situation. My job, once a source of pride and purpose, was another casualty of the accident. My company tried to accommodate me at first, letting me work remotely, but as my recovery dragged on, the calls and emails dwindled. Eventually, I was told they had to move forward without me. Losing my job felt like the final nail in the coffin. Without it, I had no reason to get out of bed in the morning, no structure to my day. The days blurred together, each one as empty as the last. I'd wake up, shuffle from the couch to the bathroom and back again, and count down the hours until it was time to sleep. My world had shrunk to the size of my living room, and I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The pain, the loneliness, the overwhelming sense of loss, it crushed me. I sobbed into my pillow, the kind of deep, heaving sobs that come from a place you didn't even know existed. What is the point? I whispered to the empty room. What's the point of trying if this is all there is? I don't know how long I cried, but eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my sister, thinking of you. You're stronger than you know. I stared at the words, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Was I strong? I didn't feel like it. But maybe, just maybe, there was a part of me that hadn't given up yet. Later that day, my physical therapist, Carla, arrived for our session. She was a no-nonsense woman with a kind but firm demeanor. She could tell I was struggling before I even said a word. Rough day? She asked, setting down her bag. I nodded, too tired to explain. Carla sat down beside me and said something that stuck with me. I know this feels impossible right now. But you've already survived the worst of it. You're here. You're alive. And that means there's still a chance to rebuild. It won't be easy, but if you decide to fight for it, your life can still be yours. Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the life I wanted, the life I thought I'd lost forever. It felt so far away, but for the first time, I wondered if it was still within reach. What if Carla was right? What if I was strong enough to fight for it? The days after Carla's words were a blur of reflection and hesitation. She'd planted a seed, and I couldn't stop thinking about her challenge. You're alive, so there's still a chance to rebuild. But rebuilding felt overwhelming. Where would I even start? My body was weak, my spirit even weaker, and the thought of trying, of failing, terrified me. But I couldn't ignore the glimmer of hope her words had sparked. Maybe I could take one small step. Just one. The following morning, I decided to start with something simple, standing up. No walker, no leaning on the armrest, just standing on my own 2 feet. My heart raced as I planted my hands on the couch and pushed up. Pain shot through my back like a lightning bolt, and my knees wobbled under my weight. But for a brief, fleeting moment, I was upright. It only lasted 5 seconds before I collapsed back onto the couch, gasping for breath. My legs burned, and my hands trembled, but I couldn't help the small smile tugging at my lips. I'd stood. On my own. That tiny victory gave me the courage to try again later that day. And again the next. Each attempt was agonizing, but I kept going, counting the seconds I could stay upright like a prizefighter measuring rounds in the ring. 5 seconds turned into 10, then 15. Encouraged by my progress, I mentioned it to Carla during our next session. She nodded approvingly, her no-nonsense demeanor softening just a little. Good, she said. You're getting stronger. Now let's see how far you can walk. That was a whole new challenge. Standing was one thing, but moving? That felt impossible. Still, I agreed to try. Carla positioned my walker in front of me and helped me to my feet. I gripped the handles like a lifeline, my knuckles white as I shuffled forward. Each step felt like a mountain climb, every muscle screaming in protest. Keep going, Carla urged. You've got this. By the time I reached the end of the living room, barely 10 feet, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. But I'd done it. I'd walked. You're stronger than you think, Carla said as she helped me back to the couch. Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after she left. In the weeks that followed, those small victories began to add up. I started tracking my progress in a journal, writing down every milestone, stood for 30 seconds today. Walked 15 feet. Climbed 1 stair. The act of documenting my efforts made me feel in control for the first time since the accident. But it wasn't just the physical milestones that mattered, it was the mental shift. For so long, I'd been consumed by anger and self-pity, but now I had something else to focus on, possibility. Of course, the journey wasn't without setbacks. There were days when the pain was too much, when my body refused to cooperate no matter how hard I tried. On those days, the old doubts crept back in, whispering, "You'll never be the same. Why bother?" One particularly rough day, I was trying to climb the stairs in my apartment building for the first time. Carla stood behind me, offering encouragement, but halfway up, my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the step, tears streaming down my face. "I can't do this," I sobbed. "It's too hard." Carla crouched beside me, her voice firm but kind. "Yes, you can. Not today, maybe. But you will. You've come too far to stop now." Her words reignited that spark of determination, and though I didn't make it up the stairs that day, I tried again the next. And the next. By the end of the month, I could climb to the 2nd floor without stopping. As my physical strength improved, so did my outlook on life. I began to reclaim small pieces of the person I used to be, the woman who didn't back down from challenges. I found myself smiling more, laughing more, and even looking forward to my therapy sessions. One day, while sorting through old boxes, I stumbled across a pair of hiking boots I hadn't worn in years. The sight of them brought a lump to my throat. I used to love hiking, exploring the trails of the Rockies with friends or just getting lost in the beauty of nature. I hadn't thought about those hikes in a long time. I picked up the boots, running my fingers over the worn leather, and made a decision: I was going to hike again. Maybe not today, maybe not even this year, but someday. That promise became my new goal, a beacon of hope guiding me forward. I shared my dream with Carla during our next session. "I want to hike again," I said, holding my breath, half expecting her to tell me it was unrealistic. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled and said, "Then let's make it happen." From that day on, my therapy sessions became more focused, more deliberate. Carla designed exercises to build the strength and endurance I'd need for hiking. Lunges, squats, balance drills. I hated every minute of it, but I pushed through, fueled by the image of myself standing at the top of a trail, looking out over the mountains. Outside of therapy, I began to make other changes. I started cooking healthier meals, swapping frozen dinners for fresh vegetables and lean proteins. At first, it was daunting, but I discovered a surprising joy in experimenting with recipes. Cooking became a form of therapy in its own right, a way to nourish not just my body, but my soul. I also started reconnecting with friends, slowly letting people back into my life. It wasn't easy at first, I still felt self-conscious about my limitations. But the more I opened up, the more I realized how much support I had. My friends didn't see me as a burden, they saw me as someone fighting to rebuild her life, and they wanted to be part of that journey. One weekend, my best friend, Mia, invited me to join her for a short walk at a nearby park. It was my first time venturing outside for something other than therapy or errands, and I was nervous. Would people stare at me with my walker? Would I slow Mia down? But as we walked, slowly, steadily, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The sun on my face, the sound of birds in the trees, the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, it was magical. By the end of the walk, I was exhausted, but I didn't care. I'd done it. And I couldn't wait to do it again. As the months went by, those walks grew longer, and the walker was eventually replaced by a cane. My world expanded little by little, and with it, my sense of possibility. The turning point came one crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after the accident. I laced up my hiking boots, the same ones I'd found in the box, and stood at the base of a beginner's trail just outside Denver. Mia was by my side, cheering me on, but this moment was for me. The trail was short, just a mile, but every step felt like a victory. My legs ached, my back protested, but I kept going, fueled by the memory of the woman I used to be and the promise I'd made to myself. When I reached the top, I looked out over the sprawling city below, tears streaming down my face. For the first time since the accident, I felt like Sarah Roberts again, not the broken, defeated version of myself, but the woman who refused to give up. When I reached the top of that trail, standing there with the city sprawled out below me, it felt like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself that had been missing for so long. My legs trembled from the climb, and my heart raced, not just from exertion, but from the sheer pride of knowing I'd done it. That moment wasn't just a victory over the physical pain or limitations, it was proof that I was stronger than the doubts that once consumed me. The hike was just the beginning. Life didn't magically become easy after that day, but it became full. I learned to embrace challenges instead of fearing them. Each day brought new opportunities to test my limits, whether it was trying a slightly harder trail, cooking a dish I'd never attempted before, or saying yes to an invitation I might have once declined. Physically, I grew stronger. My body, which once felt like a prison, became a source of pride. I moved with purpose and confidence, walking longer distances without the cane and rediscovering the joy of spontaneous movement. I even began taking yoga classes to build balance and flexibility, something I'd once thought impossible. But the real transformation happened inside. Before the accident, I'd been so consumed by the hustle of life that I rarely paused to appreciate the small things. Now, everything felt meaningful: the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the first sip of coffee in the morning, the laughter of my nieces and nephews. I stopped comparing myself to others, stopped chasing the version of success I thought I needed, and started living in the moment. My relationships deepened, too. My friends saw the change in me and were inspired by it. Mia, who had been my rock throughout the journey, started taking me on her favorite trails, and we turned our hikes into a weekly ritual. She once told me, "Watching you fight your way back reminded me how much I take for granted. You've inspired me to push myself more." Even strangers noticed. I'd share snippets of my journey on social media, not for validation, but to document my progress and, hopefully, encourage others. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people saying they saw themselves in my story, that they were starting their own journeys because of me. One day, a woman approached me at a cafe. "You don't know me," she said, her voice trembling, "but I've been following your posts. I had spinal surgery last year, and I've been so scared to try. Seeing what you've accomplished gave me the courage to start physical therapy again." Her words floored me. I never imagined my story could have that kind of impact. But hearing her speak reminded me of Carla's words during those dark days: "You're alive, so there's still a chance to rebuild." Now, I was passing that hope along to others. Liam, my nephew, became one of my biggest cheerleaders. He'd tell anyone who would listen about how Aunt Sarah climbed a mountain. It was a beginner's trail, but I didn't correct him. His enthusiasm gave me even more motivation to keep pushing myself. I wanted to be the aunt who could keep up with him, who could race him to the playground and win. A year after my first hike, I decided to take on a bigger challenge. There was a moderate-level trail I'd always wanted to try before the accident, but I'd convinced myself it was out of reach. This time, I didn't hesitate. The climb was grueling, with steep inclines and rocky terrain that tested every ounce of strength and endurance I'd built. But step by step, I made my way to the top. When I reached the summit, I stood there with Mia by my side, the wind tugging at our jackets, and let out a laugh that echoed into the open sky. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills stretching into the horizon, the kind of scenery that makes you feel small in the best possible way. But it wasn't just the view that took my breath away, it was the realization of how far I'd come. I thought about the Sarah who had once been too scared to stand without a walker. The Sarah who cried on the stairs, certain she'd never climb them again. The Sarah who lay awake at night, convinced her life was over. She was still a part of me, but she wasn't the whole story anymore. As I stood there, I whispered a quiet thank you, to Carla, to Mia, to everyone who had supported me along the way, but most of all, to myself. For not giving up. For choosing to fight. Now, every time I face a challenge, big or small, I remind myself of that climb. Life is unpredictable and often unfair, but it's also full of moments that make the struggle worth it. I've learned that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up, over and over again, even when it feels impossible. To anyone reading this who feels stuck, defeated, or unsure if they can keep going, you can. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but every small step matters. Every stumble is part of the journey. And one day, you'll look back and realize how far you've come. What's your turning point? Have you ever faced a moment that changed your life? A time when you had to rebuild, refocus, or rediscover your strength? I'd love to hear your story. Share your journey in the comments below. You never know who might be inspired by your words.